She lost the match. She lost the trophy. She lost her chance at history. And somehow, the moment she walked off that court, something strange happened that nobody in tennis could explain. The crowd did not celebrate the winner the way you would expect. Instead, thousands of people sat in silence, staring at an empty practice court, waiting for a girl who had already gone home. If you think this is just another story about a young athlete losing a tennis match, stay with me for the next few minutes. Because what happened after Alex Eala left Wimbledon is one of the strangest things the sport has seen in years. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why one loss created more noise than most victories ever do. Before we go further, I need you to do one thing for me. If stories like this, stories about the hidden emotional side of sports, the moments nobody else is talking about, mean something to you, hit that subscribe button right now. Not because I'm asking for a favor, but because these stories deserve to be told properly, and I can only keep telling them if you are here for the next one. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and let us get into this, because trust me, the deeper we go, the harder this story is going to hit. Alex Eala walked out of Wimbledon without the trophy. Jasmine Paolini had just survived a brutal 3-set battle, 6-4 for 6, 6-3, and she earned every bit of that win. That should have been the end of the story. A promising young player loses in the 4th round. Tennis gives her a respectful nod, and the world moves on to the next match. That is how it always works. That is the normal rhythm of this sport. But this time, the story refused to leave with the loser. And that right there's the part that should make you lean in, because normal athletes do not do this. Normal 4th round exits do not do this. Something else was happening underneath the scoreboard, and we are about to break it down piece by piece. Picture this. A 21-year-old walks into the most famous tennis tournament on the planet. She is not the favorite. She is not the defending champion. She is a bright young talent from the Philippines, a country that has almost never seen one of its own push deep into a Grand Slam. Nobody expects a fairy tale. And then, somehow, she becomes something far bigger than fairy tale. She becomes a symbol, a spark, a reason for people who have never watched a single tennis match in their lives to suddenly check scores at 3 in the morning. How does that happen? Keep watching, because the answer is more emotional than you think. This was never only about one upset. It was not only about beating a defending champion. It was not only about reaching the 2nd week of Wimbledon. It was about something much bigger than the scoreboard. It was about a reaction. The kind of reaction that turns a practice court into a national event. The kind of reaction that does not switch off just because the match is over. And to understand why that reaction mattered so much, you have to understand exactly what she was carrying every single time she stepped onto that grass. For most players, a 4th round exit means the cameras move on. That is simply how tennis works. But with Eala, it did not move on, and the reason starts long before her final point against Paolini. She did not walk onto that court alone. She carried an entire country with her. She carried families waking up before sunrise just to watch her serve. She carried people checking scores quietly at their office desks. She carried communities who did not know a single other name in the draw, but somehow knew exactly when she was playing. And here is something worth remembering as we go deeper into this story. Tennis does not only grow when champions lift trophies. It grows when new people suddenly feel like they belong in the story, and that is exactly what she did. Then came the match that changed everything. When she beat the defending champion, one of the most recognizable names in the entire sport, the temperature around her shifted instantly. She was no longer just a nice story from the Philippines. She was a threat, a real problem for anyone left in the draw. And that is when casual fans, the ones who do not know every ranking or every tactical detail, suddenly understood something simple but powerful. A young player from a country almost never seen at this level had just beaten someone everyone recognized, and the sport suddenly felt wider than it did the day before. Stay with me, because this is exactly where the story gets strange. Her loss to Paolini should have ended the noise. It did not, and that alone tells you something rare was happening. Usually when a rising player loses, the story becomes neat and tidy. Great week, tough loss, bright future. Everyone moves on. But this time, the emotional weight did not travel with the winner. It stayed behind with the player who had just been eliminated, because she had not just built a fan base. She had built a living, breathing community around every single point of her run. And when she lost, that community did not vanish because they stopped caring. They scattered because the reason they had all gathered in the first place had just walked off the court. Now, here is where it gets even more interesting. So do not go anywhere. The first sign that something unusual was happening was not the scoreboard. It was the sound. A normal underdog gets applause after a win, and a few loud cheers during a match. This did not behave like a normal run. It started on the practice courts, and if you understand tennis, you know that practice courts are where real emotional pull gets exposed. Nobody is guaranteed drama there. Nobody is guaranteed a big moment. Sometimes all you see is a player hitting the same forehand over and over, drinking water, adjusting a towel, talking quietly to a coach. And yet, people still came. Crowds still gathered. Why would anyone wait around just to watch routine practice hitting, unless something deeper was pulling them in? Then came the flags. You could see them scatter across the stands, near the walkways, in every online clip and photo. The Philippine flag was not decoration that week. It was identity. For countless fans, she was not just a player trying to win tennis matches. She was proof that someone from their country could stand on grass that once felt impossibly out of reach. And once that emotional weight enters the picture, every single point starts to feel heavier. A break point is no longer just a break point. It feels like an entire country holding its breath. Stick around, because the next part of the story is where things go global, and it changes everything about how we understand modern sports fame. The internet took this story far beyond the boundaries of Wimbledon. Tennis used to be contained by the court. You watched the match, you read the result. Maybe you caught a highlight later. Not anymore. One fan posts a celebration clip. Another shares a childhood photo. Another mentions her early training days. Another admits they had never watched tennis seriously before, but now they are checking the draw because of her. That is the exact moment a player crosses a line from athlete into cultural storyline, and she crossed that line fast. She was not only being watched inside the grounds of Wimbledon, she was being carried by people thousands of miles away, in Manila, in California, in Toronto, anywhere there was a phone in one hand and a live score open in the other. So here's the real mystery, and I want you to sit with this for a second before we continue. If this was only about tennis, the buzz should have ended the moment she lost. If it was only about national pride, the wider tennis world could have simply looked away. But none of that happened. Instead, people kept talking about everything that had changed around her, the crowds, the flags, the practice courts, the feeling that Wimbledon itself sounded different while she was still in the draw. And that difference is exactly what disappeared the moment she left. Fans did not vanish from Wimbledon. The tournament did not become empty. The grass did not lose its history. But one very specific kind of fan vanished from the emotional center of the story. The fan who turned her matches into a family event. The fan who did not need statistics to understand that something rare was unfolding in front of them. That kind of energy is almost impossible to replace. And that is precisely why the silence after she left felt so loud. If you are starting to feel the weight of this story, imagine how it felt for the people who lived it in real time, because we are not even at the most powerful part yet. Think about Wimbledon like an old, legendary theater. Beautiful lighting, a historic stage, performers who know exactly where to stand because they have done this 1,000 times before. Then one day, a new performer walks out. She does not own the theater. She has not won the biggest prize on that stage. But the room changes anyway. A section of the crowd stands up before anyone expects it. They bring flags. They bring family. They bring a kind of noise that does not sit quietly in its seat. Suddenly, the theater feels less like a museum and more like something alive. That is exactly what happened the moment she walked onto that grass. And it is exactly what disappeared the moment she walked off it. Here is the twist nobody saw coming. And this changes the entire way you should think about this story. The real question was never whether Wimbledon could survive without her. Of course it could. This is Wimbledon. The tournament does not collapse because one young player loses in the fourth round. The real question is sharper than that. Can any tournament replace the exact kind of energy she brought with her? Because she did not just bring fans to a tennis match. She brought an entirely different type of fan into the center of the story. A louder fan, a more emotional fan, a fan who was not just watching points being played on grass, but watching a country touch a stage that had always felt impossibly far away. For Filipino fans and communities scattered across the world, this was not just a good week of sports. It was a rare and precious sight. A young Filipino walking through one of the oldest, most prestigious tennis tournaments on earth, not as a guest, not as a side story, but as a real competitor with real danger in the draw. When a player carries that kind of representation, every small moment turns into something bigger than itself. A camera shot becomes a memory people keep forever. A crowd chant becomes a statement. A flag in the stands becomes proof that someone finally made it through a door that had been closed for generations. And when that player leaves, the tournament does not just lose a name from the schedule. It loses the emotional reason so many people were tuning in the first place. Rankings can tell you exactly where a player stands in the world. What rankings can never tell you is how many people stopped scrolling the moment her name appeared on their screen. They cannot tell you how many families gathered around a single phone because of her match. They cannot tell you how much louder a quiet practice court suddenly feels the moment she walks onto it. And they definitely cannot tell you what disappears the moment she walks away. That is the real effect here. Not empty seats, not a tournament falling apart, but connection that most players never build, even after winning far bigger titles than this one. So, Wimbledon was still Wimbledon after she left. The grass was still legendary. The stands were still packed. The trophy still mattered exactly as much as it always has. But one part of the noise was completely gone. The fans who were not just watching tennis, but watching a dream get closer with every single point. The fans who were watching a young Filipina step into a place where almost nobody from her country had ever stood before. That is why her exit felt so much bigger than a simple fourth-round loss. And that is exactly why the story is not actually over. Because if reaching the fourth round created this much emotion, this much noise, this much of a global reaction, you have to ask yourself the question everyone in tennis is quietly asking right now. What happens when she goes even deeper? What happens when the same energy shows up again with more experience, more belief, and even bigger stage watching her every move? That question alone is why you're not going to want to miss what comes next. So make sure you're already subscribed, because the moment this story continues, you will want to be the first to know